Yeah. Yeah, now we're live. Okay. Welcome everybody to Legal Tech Week. This is the show where we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation. And today is June 7th, 2024. I'm Bob Ambrogi. I have a blog called Law Sites and a podcast called Law Next. And our panelists today, first of all, we have the Mariano Rivera of law librarians. I think Gene O'Grady, the inductee into the double A double
Oh,
L
yeah.
Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really
That
quite an
really is a
honor.
cool. It is a cool honor.
You
Yeah.
need a walk-on song.
Anyway, I am Gina Grady. I am the writer, editor, everything of Dewey B Strategic, and I also write a monthly column for Legal Tech Hub.
All right, and welcome back from your travels too.
Yeah. Sore feet.
And yeah, and next up, also back from some travels, Nikki Black.
Black. I'm the head of SME and external education at the Affinipay legal side of things, which is my case, LawPay, DocketWise, and CasePeer. And I write legal tech columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, and the Daily Record. And I also oversee our industry and write our industry and benchmark reports on the Affinipay side of things as well. And I'm excited. We got a bunch of interesting things, fun things to talk about today. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, and sporting his Legal Talk Network T-shirt, Joe Patrice.
Yeah, Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast, which is on the Legal Talk Network, hence my T-shirt. Yeah, no, I am here. I've survived another week without being found guilty of 34 felony counts in the state, so I'm doing a great job.
Yeah, okay. And let's see, Stephanie, how about you?
I will not talk about my felonies, but I am Stephanie Wilkins, editor-in-chief of Legal Tech News at ALM, and happy Friday, everyone.
If you have felonies to talk about, you need to share. We need to know.
I'm smarter than that. I went to law school, Bob. I know.
So they happened after you went to law school because you wouldn't have gone to law school. Who knows? All right, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Embry. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, and whatever felonies that I have committed were before the drone police, so I wasn't caught or otherwise outed.
All right. Well, Jean was just lamenting before we started that she missed all of our talk about the Stanford hallucination study. But good news for Jean because there's more to talk about. Little in the be careful what you wish for department, I guess. After Thomson Reuters and several critics pointed out that the study did not include the Westlaw Precision, the AI-assisted research for Westlaw Precision, which was their actual AI legal research tool, which you would have thought it would have included in the first place. The authors, of course, had said, well, we asked Westlaw for it and they wouldn't give us access. So Thomson Reuters gave them access and they went in whirlwind time and redid the study. And you know, it didn't come out too well for Thomson Reuters. Kind of funny results, actually. I was pretty surprised by the results, frankly. But I don't know. Gene, you got a chance to look at that? What were your thoughts
Yeah,
on
well,
that?
I mean, is there any chance that since it sounds like none of them were lawyers or legally trained, so is it possible that they just, I know they went to Stanford, it must be geniuses, but is it possible they just didn't know what they were doing?
Well, at least one was a lawyer.
Yeah,
The guy who leads the
and
team, Daniel
I
Ho,
mean,
is the lawyer.
yeah, I'm surprised that Pablo didn't pull them aside and give them one of his Pablo introductions to neural networks and legal research, you know. No, but it does sound to me like it must have been sloppy in some way. I don't know. I have to catch up on all this. I really would have loved to have jumped into the middle of this, but sadly I was out of the country.
Yeah.
I thought that the more I've looked at this, and I wasn't as versed in it before we had our conversation last week, but the more I've looked at this, the more I really come around to Greg's point from last week's show that it seems like Westlaw kind of gets dinged for having longer answers because longer answers introduces more opportunities for things to be technically wrong, which, it's true, it would make things more technically wrong. That said, I, as a lawyer, would prefer a longer answer than a shorter one. So you're kind of left weighing that. And so I don't know as though I would be as harsh on them, because I almost feel like what's causing them to get bad results here is something that I think is probably in the long term a net good about the product. But
yeah, I could never figure out when they said, what was it? LexisNexis gave inaccurate answers maybe 35% of the time, and Westlaw was much higher than that. But I'm not exactly sure what an inaccurate answer meant precisely.
Right.
I
Were they
mean,
looking for black letter law answers or nuanced answers based on facts? I mean,
Right.
there's a lot I'd need to know about. What were the questions? I mean, did they provide the questions
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
people
they
could
provide the
evaluate?
questions. Yeah, they provide the questions, and they also define, what they consider a hallucination, what they consider, and it's not just hallucinations. They are looking at things like incomplete answers, and yeah, I think we talked about this last week, where, they sort of dinged results if the answer was, I can't answer this. And that, I think that's maybe a plus of AI, when AI says, this is not something I can answer. It's beyond my capabilities. I think that's a good thing, rather than have it just make something up.
Yeah.
Right.
It also
And
seems to me a
yeah.
little bit unfair, because with the traditional legal research methods, sometimes the answers you got were completely irrelevant, right? Like, you're like, this is totally not on point. These aren't the types of cases I was looking for. And so you could assume it was like user error, like my search parameters are wrong. Let me reset them or change them or tweak them. But, I don't think you can ever expect the answers to be 100% on point. I mean, that's your job to analyze them, right? You're supposed to analyze the results. And in the comments, somebody asked Julian Webster, is it possible that the TR AI system's just bad? I mean, it's possible, but I don't know about you guys, but I have a really hard time believing that it is, because I've got a lot of faith in Pablo and his team and co-counsel, that's grounded in.
But he's not the people developing the TR
Right.
AI assisted research. That's a whole different thing,
But isn't
a
it
whole different
like
group.
applied on top? Aren't they using some? I mean,
No,
No.
they're not
everyone's
using the
different.
case text technology at all. That's
Yeah, in
entirely
this
different.
they didn't test that. They tested the Westlaw stuff eventually.
Oh, well, I mean, for some reason I thought that co-counsel was they're starting to sprinkle it across everything. And I thought when we went to New York and saw all the previews that it was applied on top of the research, but that's not what they tested. And if that's not what they tested, sorry, I didn't realize that part. But
No.
I mean, the AI
didn't-
system was not fantastic when I wrote for Thomson Reuters, and I used their research for my book. So, but that predated generative AI.
Yeah, I think part of the thing is, you have to think about what are you really using AI for? And if you're looking to get precise, factual answers, maybe Gen AI isn't the tool you should be using. Gen AI is good for kind of getting thoughts and direction and summarizations and that kind of thing. In legal research, I think what the Thomson Reuters platform and what the LexisNexis one seems to do is give you a pretty good general answer, like Joe was saying. But part of the problem with Thomson Reuters, they give you too long of an answer, and so they actually lose points, because if there's anything wrong anywhere in that answer in the study, they consider that a wrong answer, even though 90% of it may be correct in what it's saying to you. But
And
I'll
none-
have to
if you want a quick
and-
answer to a question, this is a way to do it.
But none
I'd
of
have
these
to-
issues are unique to generative AI. I mean, I actually believe that legal research is an iterative process, and it would be dangerous to go to any system and say, give me my answer. I don't want to read anything. That's not how lawyers should be practicing law.
Yeah.
Well, and as compared to the human component, I know there are a lot of lawyers that often give too long answers, and I may be one of them.
I mean, the point that I've made a few times on here and in the pages above the law is that the quest, because everyone thinks of it this way, the quest is to say, oh, well, litigators can answer research questions by asking it. And I've always said, that's not how litigation works. I don't want to know what the law is. I want to know how I can bend the law to help my client. Basically, that's how litigation tends to work. But for compliance and stuff like that, right answers are very important. And so it can do that. I actually think that on the litigation side, I hadn't thought of this before, but as I went through and started thinking more about this, I think there's a real value to compiling your memo or brief or whatever and saying, here's what I say, tell me I'm wrong. I think Gen AI research that tries to do that might actually be a very useful tool, to something that can read what you put together and say, actually, here's some other cases that we think mean you're wrong. I think that's probably a better way of doing it, which is the opposite of the way you normally think about writing your brief. You think about writing it first, but maybe the use of this tool is on the back end, not the front end, for litigators anyway.
I want to go back to the. Go ahead, Steve.
No, the ability to punch in your opponent's brief and filing and have it look for flaws and logical fallacies or what have you. That for litigators, that would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to go back to when you're figuring out these error rates and, you know, how it all comes down to how you're defining things. And I want to go back to this concept of like getting dinged for saying, I don't know. Like, to me, that is, I mean, we're brushing over that as a minor point, like whether or not what these tools are good or bad or whatever. To me, that's a huge one, because for so long, when we first started learning about hallucinations, we were all like, shouldn't we just train these tools to say, if they don't know, say, I don't know, rather than making shit up? And now it did, and now they're dinging it for that. So the rest of the study aside, I think that's a huge flaw if we want to actually deal with hallucinations. And I mean, if that was taken out, I wonder what the results would be. I mean, that might still be terrible. I'm not saying it would make these tools look good. I personally just hate that aspect of it, because I want more of these to say, I can't find the answer, or I don't know.
Yeah.
And then VLEX, I think, gives a confidence score. I don't know if anybody else is doing that, but they give some sort of a ranking about how confident they are in the results they gave.
Mm-hmm. They do.
Yeah, I can't remember whether the Thomson Reuters product does that or not.
I can't remember.
I don't think it
have
does.
access. I don't have access to it either. I mean, I haven't used it since we were all in New York when we got to play around with it a little bit there. But I don't know who. And that's kind of one of the funny things about some of these products is how much we all talk about them and how few of us actually have access to them. And that's kind of one of the points of the study, is that we need more, both industry, both company benchmarking, but also independent and objective benchmarking of these products to determine just to what extent they do what they say they do.
It was also my impression during the rollout meeting that it wasn't actually covering everything at rollout. Like, I think that more and more content is being added to AI over time. So I think that is another thing. Did the users, and this would be on TR, how obvious is it that the content you're interested in may not be loaded? Because I don't think they had some of the state stuff. They didn't have regulations at one point. I don't know if those have been loaded, but they were growing the content, and they started out with, I believe, federal case law, and they've been expanding it. But if they wanted an answer that required access to state regulations, may not get the answer unless it's in a case, it's referred to in a case. So I don't know. It may be too early to be doing studies like that. That's one of the things I'm thinking is everything is so immature in their life cycle.
Well, but they're playing off the fact that these companies are marketing these products as ready for prime time and as substantially hallucination free. And if the company is going to be marketing that, and there are going to be a lot of lawyers out there who are buying these products believing that marketing, then there's a problem. And this goes beyond. Supposedly this solves the whole Schwartz problem, of making up hallucinated cases. So there are a lot of lawyers who are using these products saying, okay, I don't have to worry about, if I'm using Thomson Reuters and I'm using Lexis and I'm using Reg and all that, then I don't have to worry about hallucinations.
No, but I mean, were there any instances of whole hallucinated cases and wholly hallucinated citations that came up in this study? I mean, I do think that level of problem is not going to happen in in a closed legal database system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree.
hallucinated answers, but not hallucinated citations, I don't
Well,
think.
Right.
that was
and-
part of it too, where like it came down to what is a hallucination, if it's a partially hallucinated one. And Lexis a little while back had the thing where they were citing cases in the future, you know, like cases from 2025 or 2026. And yeah,
I'm pretty sure I can.
That'd be
I'm
great.
pretty sure I can. That's not a problem. I'm pretty sure I can tell you what the Supreme Court's going to do in 2025.
Yeah.
I've got it worked
well,
out.
But-
we had chatbots predicting the elections of this year already. But like I went off last week about how no company should advertise anything as hallucination free, because that's just not how AI works. And like you just lose credibility with me in general if you do that. Like,
I've
sorry.
never heard him say that though. I mean,
Yeah.
they've
It's on
said they
LexisNexis
substantially
website.
reduce
99.9 wasn't one of them.
I mean, it was copy on Lexis's website.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was meant to say if it doesn't have if it doesn't have a hyperlinked source, that means you can't rely on it. But anything with a hyperlinked source was hallucination, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But like, I just would never ever use those words because I don't know. I hate it.
Yeah.
I do
They
recall
counted
when
wrong answers as hallucinations, I think.
I do recall when we went to New York at the Thomson Reuters thing that they did say that their system would reduce hallucinations, but that inaccuracies could still develop. Or
Yeah,
still be-
and
It says it right on
That
the
was-
landing page for the product. It's got a little tab that says, understand this is not perfect.
yeah, the TR that's a great distinction that Steve pointed out, that they made very clear that they thought hallucinations, defined as making up cases about the Montreal Convention, about airline, whatever, that kind of thing is not going to be a big problem for them. That the more important thing is being able to look at the case and understand, hey, this is a dissent, so this doesn't matter. Oh, this means something else. Like those kinds of mistakes are the things that are the real challenges, they were saying. And I think that's probably true. I think that like retail ChatGPT style stuff is going to be a mess, but the legal ones are going to be on that next level problem. And so if you define hallucinations as making up cases outright, they are probably hallucination free. But if you define it as giving you an answer that it made up out of whole cloth, then they aren't hallucination.
They counted things like there was the question about the trick question of why did Justice Ginsburg dissent in Obergefell? Well, she didn't dissent in Obergefell, and it was a trick question, and practical law got it wrong. And then there was another one about what's the standard of proof in for overturning a regulation in an abortion case or something like that, where there had been a fairly recent 2022, I think, Supreme Court case that changed the standard of proof, and the Lexis answer gave the prior standard of proof as the answer and missed the update to it.
I think Leslie's point, this is what I was going to raise earlier when you said, Bob, that people are paying for these products. They're not just paying for them, they're paying a lot of money. And they're charging a premium for these products. And if they truly have inaccuracy rates that are even sort of close to the ones from that study, then people are getting way overcharged. They're not getting their money's worth. And so I think it is important to think about it in that context too. They're charging a ton of money. And
Well,
they're
I
charging
think-
a ton of money for just a bunch of inaccuracies. That's
This is
pretty ridiculous.
I actually wonder what the actual adoption rates are because they are so expensive. And because in fact, these products are competing, as somebody pointed out in the chat, the prior versions of all of these products were pretty good just using ordinary AI. They were really good and fully developed and had beautiful user interfaces. And then we're gonna the value proposition is we're gonna charge you X amount more, like a huge amount more. You're gonna leave behind this beautiful intuitive interface, and you're going to go into the Wild West where we're going to try and get it all right. We're still building it. I'm not sure it's a great, marketing approach. I think maybe everybody should have had some humility and waited a year.
Yeah.
Well, there's a race to the top here in every legal tech company, not just legal tech companies doing it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is if I had a client who asked me a legal question and I gave an answer and I said, oh, by the way, I'm only right about 42% of the time. I don't
Yeah.
think that would fly very well.
I mean, we just need to train them all to say it depends, and then they will seem really
Right.
realistic, like it's legal advice from lawyers.
100%.
Well, while we're on the topic of using Gen AI for legal advice, I guess, Stephanie, you had the story this week of the 11th Circuit judge who did something interesting, and some other judges' responses to that. You want to share that?
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was, I guess if anyone hasn't seen it, it was Judge Kevin Newsom out of the 11th Circuit, who in a 32-page concurrence admitted to using ChatGPT not to write the concurrence, but to inform his sort of legal reasoning. He's a self-proclaimed plain text guy. Ultimately, what it came down to is it was like this in-ground trampoline with this wooden cover, and did it constitute landscaping in an insurance policy? Insurance policy did not define landscaping, so it said to it. Ultimately, the appeal did not hinge on, they found it on another grounds. He didn't have to decide it on the definition of landscaping, which I think allowed him to do this thought experiment. Otherwise it wouldn't have, but like, it was really like legitimately interesting. So we had this 32-page concurrence, which could have been a law review article, but wouldn't have gotten the eyeballs, where he was like, I was sitting around consulting dictionaries. What does it mean? I had the thought, what would ChatGPT? I also tested Bard. That was the timing of it. It was Bard before Gemini. What does landscaping mean? And then he did the step further of like, would this constitute it? And he went into this whole long analysis of how chatbots could help this. And I mean, it's a fascinating thought experiment is what it is. It's not whatever, but in it, he was also like, I know people will, condemn this as heresy in the profession, but I encourage you to just consider it. It was actually really entertaining to read. It's gotten tons of traction and people discussing it, and I mean, wherever you fall on it. And it was interesting because it's probably not a judge that group would really discuss a lot in a positive way, but super interesting thought experiment. And then Isha did a follow-up with a group of judges of both current and retired, and what their take on it was. I think they were a little bit less like yay go, they were a little bit more like super interesting, but maybe not so much. But it was really, really fascinating because I mean, this whole concept of I mean, you're consulting dictionaries. Why can't you necessarily, I mean, if you were going to Google it, is that a step too far? And my take being like, you could go, it opens a slippery slope way further, obviously, in the wrong hands, a ChatGPT, but it was really just, it was well written. He was self-deprecating in it. It was kind of funny. It was good. I'll put the links in the chat.
I thought it was pretty clever because the term wasn't defined in the insurance policy. The law is that it's given its quote ordinary meaning unquote, and his reasoning was, well, what I mean, that large language models, that's kind of something that they could be able to do is what is the ordinary meaning, because there would be more more attraction and more hits on how the term is ordinarily used. So that was kind of interesting, and it didn't strike me as inappropriate, although I was somewhat surprised. I saw Judge Shagel commented on it, and he wasn't pleased with it either, and I would have expected him to be a little bit more open to it. But yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting and kind of clever, frankly.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought that, look, we talk about things that Gen AI can't do. One of the things it's very good at doing is telling you what the zeitgeist of the internet is, basically. And it can look at a lot of things and say, like, normal people would think this is landscaping, because that's what they're trying to do. I will say, and obviously contractual terms should be given ordinary plain English meanings and whatever. And so it's really good there. In my write-up, I reference another article that I had previously written about a much more troubling interpretation, which is that John Bush from the Sixth Circuit, who is on the circuit court by virtue of having run a blog. So, I mean, I don't understand where my invitation isn't then. But he made a claim to the University of Chicago's FedSoc chapter recently that he wants to sees a world where Gen AI is utilized to come up with the original meaning, being the old school framers thing, and he's trying to use it to jury rig originalism cherry picking, rather than having to scour through hundreds and hundreds of old documents to cherry pick the things that support what they want to call original meaning. We could just have Gen AI do it. And that's a much more troubling interpretation than asking what normal people might think landscaping is. So I thought Newsom's opinion made a very good case for using it for this purpose, but I pump the brakes a little bit that I worry that people are going to take it a little far.
Well, and on that point, Joe, I mean, you could construct a prompt to give you the answer that you wanted. It comes to that, originalism and textualism. So,
Yeah.
I thought it was super clever. And I actually thought it got a lot more positive reaction. I mean, when I posted it on LinkedIn, I just did a straight article about this is what he said in it. I mean, 32 pages. Let me break it down the relevant parts for you. And then I posted it on LinkedIn. And it was just like, here's what he did. I want to know your thoughts without influencing it. And it was overwhelmingly positive in a way I didn't expect. And it was like in Isha's reaction piece with the judges, it was really only the two current sitting judges that were all like, I'm not so sure about this. Even the retired ones were like, I really applaud the innovation of this. Like, I think it was the two current judges that were a little bit like, this might be crossing the bounds of what we do. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was I thought it was interesting, but I think it also kind of points to this like greater use of Gen AI that I don't know if we've talked that much about it, but it's really just the idea of using it for brainstorming all sorts of different things. And I thought in a way that's sort of what he was doing. It's just kind of like he's sitting around trying to think about what does this term mean, and then he just kind of turned to ChatGPT to kind of help him brainstorm around it. And I've in my own work found it useful. Sometimes when I'm working, I do lobbying work, and sometimes when I'm thinking about, what arguments could I raise around this bill or against this bill? And I mean, I've got my own ideas already, but I think, I don't have a co-counsel next door. I'm a solo. I sit here and have nobody to bounce things off of sometimes. Sometimes I like go to ChatGPT and say, what arguments could I raise? And I'll be amazed at some things that it'll come up with to suggest that I can use. And in some products, I mean, some of the VLEXs, a couple of their options in Vincent now kind of are really designed around that, around being able to upload a document or kind of put in a question and just sort of brainstorm different approaches to how to analyze or think or respond to whatever it is you're looking at. So
I think
there's
it's,
go ahead, Nick.
I think it's great for that purpose, brainstorming, and also just when I give talks on it, I say that I think of ChatGPT as like this really smart assistant that's really wants to help, that sits on my shoulder, that sort of has a pathological lying problem. So you got to kind of take it with like that grain of salt and be like, I don't know what it's going to say, but oftentimes it's really helpful. But let me just look over this really carefully. But it's fantastic for that, and it is. It's like it's really a brilliant. If if you took its IQ test or something, like this is a really smart thing sitting on your shoulder to help you. So I think it's great for that kind of thing too.
There's a well-known mediator, probably most of us know him, that he has used it to help him think through solutions to mediations and strategies, and how might this be resolved in some manner other than paying X amount of dollars. And he says it's very helpful to brainstorm those kinds of things.
Well, a couple minutes ago, Steve was talking about the ability to kind of manipulate prompts to look for the results you might want. Gene, you had a story pick this week, not that you wrote but that your colleague Niki Shaver wrote about that, related to that topic. You want
Yeah, it's like whenever people write stories, I wish I had written. I have to applaud them. So her question was, are prompts the new precedents? And having worked myself, at trying to create precedent banks in various level iterations of technology, I was fascinated. What was she hit? Anyway, my first reaction was, because I am focused on research, I immediately go to research is too unique. Why would you want to have a precedent bank of research queries? But when I read the full article, I mean, it raised some good questions, because she talked about firms where they actually have very, very long people, and I think that the question is, are we going to teach lawyers how to do this, or are we going to have engineers do this? And she said that they had done some study where 43% of the firms responding said that they had done prompt training for lawyers. And I think the story suggests that prompt training for lawyers is sort of falling out of fashion, and they're going to have specialists do it, and they're going to have, and I think she's on here, so maybe she can respond to this. My impression was that these very, very long queries that she said some firms are developing might be related to, how do I draft a merger agreement between these kinds of entities that have these kinds of clauses? Because she said some of the prompts are literally a page long that are being developed for reuse, and firms are beginning to have, like almost precedent libraries of prompts, which I thought was fascinating. So I guess the question is, if it's repeatable, that makes sense. If you're looking for something unique, why would you want to go to a prompt library? I mean, I guess one of the things that annoys me, as came up in the earlier discussion, is that lawyers are trying to avoid actively engaging with the research process and thinking on their feet because I always heard this when, over a gazillion years of dealing with associates and partners who are critical of associates' work, is that associates may not even have understood the assignment. So if you don't understand your assignment, the prompt isn't the problem. The problem is you didn't have a good conversation with the partner to find out what he wanted. So, I mean, I think that I don't know that prompts can solve all of our problems, but I think it's a really interesting idea of aggregating if firms do certain kinds of work, and it's obvious that a precedent library of prompts could save people a lot of time and aggravation. I'd like to know more about that. So,
Well, I thought part of what she also suggested was the idea that I thought that part was really interesting, but also the idea that vendors maybe should be or already are starting to do this more themselves. That they're kind of removing the need for the user to enter a prompt and kind of presenting the user with pre-configured prompts. I think, again, VLEX is a good example of that in Vincent, where their new document analyzer, where you upload a document and it gives you a whole list of suggested prompts for how you might want to analyze that document. And you can still do your own, but it takes some of the work away from you.
And, I think the other thing, she also suggests that this is a temporary problem, that the technology is going to catch up. And maybe even in a year, it's not going to be as complicated, or, vendors are going to solve this for their products.
Yeah.
Okay. So Niki just responded to me. She said that the prompts were in regard to undertakings other than legal research, it was for other kinds of legal work. So interesting.
A reminder, if you want everybody to see your comments, select the drop down, everyone in the comment field.
Live, yeah.
Yeah, I can see the sort of the centralized prompts for some kind of legal work. It might not be as effective for things like litigation, where a lot of times it's very fact specific, and so a nuanced fact could make all the difference. But I guess even there's still sort of bulk things that could be handled with a prompt library.
I thought the article was great because, people have been saying since, last fall, like, prompt engineering is dead. Because, legal tech, like, as soon as something is popular, we want to kill it. Like, is such and such dead? I'm like, no, maybe eventually it will be, but it's not yet. We still need it. And if you have these prompts that are a page and a half long, because if you're doing it correctly, you have to keep iterating. You have to keep getting it until it's actually right for each thing. And if you're not writing that down and saving it somewhere, like, you're back to reinventing the wheel, like we accuse everyone of doing all the time. So why would you not be doing that and saving it somewhere? So until it is actually dead, not like when people want to say it's dead, why would you not be putting this down and saving it somewhere and sharing it with other people?
Well, I thought go ahead, Joe.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so the next frontier is, having talked to some people who are already working on this, the next frontier is basically creating another layer. It is creating a layer where that prompt library becomes what AI gets trained on, and then you type in a truncated thought, and it thinks through, oh, given these things, here's what a good prompt looks like, and then it runs that in. It is a thing that I know people have built. A promptizer, which is a joke I made about like the company I'll build is a thing that creates prompts. And then somebody told me, actually, I've already got one here. I know that it actually is real.
Well, and those layers are part of what help reduce the hallucinations, both on like the programming end and also when you're trying to, right now as a tech company with all the hallucination risks and not always knowing what it's going to respond with, even if it's not a hallucination, I thought the user interface thing was really interesting because by creating the drop-down menus, which is something Code Council does, it helps you create those guardrails on the back end so that you can then ensure that the answer is more in line with what they're trying to achieve. And because you're limiting what they can actually ask for initially, as the technology improves and as you're trying to build out better versions of your own technology, it just makes sure they're going to get more accurate answers and you're actually going to be providing useful results for your customers. So I think there's like a bunch of different layers, and the user interface is a really important thing to think about.
So the same prompt never elicits the same answer twice. So does that at all go to the precedential value of prompts?
It does, but if they'll at least be like, if it's a really long prompt to get at like a certain kind of agreement, should at least be fairly close, like close, maybe close enough if you're still tailoring it to your parties. I don't know. I think that's the point. And again, I mean, we've been talking about these various interfaces and these drop downs and these tools. Like, I mean, what was it like half an hour ago? We were talking about how expensive these tools are. And if we don't have these tools, if somebody doesn't have these tools yet with these drop downs, that's where this prompt library might be really helpful. And so if you're using a cheaper, less robust tool with these built in, that might still be helpful.
All right. Now, has anybody developed a product yet that is developing prompts in a suggestive female voice?
Oh, it's the Niki Joe showdown. Let's do it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so we previewed this a little bit last week. We did have a couple weeks ago now, we've had the issue where OpenAI released their new fun version, voice activated version, and then they had a voice that seemed remarkably similar to the characterization of the AI voice that Scarlett Johansson played in Her. It seems, according to Scarlett Johansson's letter to the public, that she was asked to do a voice for it because they wanted to have the AI be her voice because of that movie, putting aside that movie is a cautionary example about how you shouldn't do that, but they wanted to do that anyway.
Sam Altman has come out very publicly multiple times and said it is his favorite movie, and he thinks it is a perfect example of how AI and humans should interact.
Again, right after it was released, right after his press conference.
This is like Sam Altman's like sweaty teenage years, and he's like ridden this wave until he was the head of a tech company. But I'll expand on that when it's
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, look,
well, now's the time.
For anybody who's ever done it, looked at the who knows the viral message I'm talking about. This is the torment matrix. There's a viral meme that went out where somebody made a joke years ago on Twitter, like sci-fi writer in the 60s. I think of the torment matrix as a cautionary example, and then tech bro in the 2020s. We invented the torment matrix from the torment nexus from the famous sci-fi book. Yeah, this is a cautionary example, but he thinks it's his favorite movie because he's an idiot and he wants to do that. That's how tech bros think. Anyway, that side. So he tried to get her to do it. She wouldn't. And then they have this sound-alike voice. So she sent apparently cease and desists and whatever. They are pulling it. But she also in her letter suggests that she wants to know all her lawyers are asking for what went into this decision. Now, obviously, if there's no lawsuit, they may not answer this. But I think that's the interesting question, because I think she or her lawyers know that there's probably a weak case for just impersonation. But there's a strong case if they used another actress to sound like her, and then they used some like auto-tune AI thing to make that actress sound a little bit more like her. Like that's a thing that could have happened, and if that happens, then we enter a more stealing her work sort of thing. But just an impersonation seems really tenuous. Now I looked into this because Niki took the opposite opinion. We talked about this a lot in our internal conversations. So I don't know if you want to lay out that, but I then had to read some cases and I had some interesting revelations from that. But I don't know if you want to go.
Did you read cases or did the chatbot read you cases?
Well, as we said earlier, we do not have access to all of these nice tools that do all this. So I've had to read some cases.
Well, and our internal, we have a Slack channel that we all talk on, and I just read some overviews. I did not do deep dives into these cases, but it seems to me that there's some arguments on this issue. The issue that I wrote about was the one that really was a hot button issue for me. But on this particular issue of Scarlett Johansen and ripping off her voice, I think that there's an argument that because of the nature of that movie, because of the role that her voice played, and given her own stature as a really famous person, that and all of the preamble that you talked about, them reaching out to her, saying no, them reaching out again, her saying no, and now the post forensic stuff that they've done on this, it's like a 99% match, because of the tuning using the actress's voice. I mean, I think she's got a strong case, and I think that if it was litigated, it might make new law, because I do think that it's definitely a little bit pushing the limits of what's already there. But again, I have not done the research. I've just looked at, the holdings and compared a couple different conclusions from different cases.
But you did write on Above the Law this week that you welcome our new Sexbot Overlords.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that was what really pissed me off about this whole thing.
Yeah. But I would note before you get that, but I would note that in that movie, she doesn't appear physically. Her entire role in that movie is her voice of an AI, which I think is a distinction that is important in this.
It is. So that 99% match stat does speak to the thing that in my article writing this up, I make that caveat. Like, if they're doing some sort of weird auto-tuning thing, this gets really compelling. They claim that they aren't, that it's just an actress impersonating, but whatever. Anyway, there are California cases that have held that voice impersonators can give rise to liability. Now, that said, the wrinkle there is it was Bette Midler in the 80s, before she was really known as an actress and more known as a singer. And it was Tom Waits, one of the most bizarre voices out there. So like somebody like a really unique voice and also a singer. And all those cases kind of turned on the idea that as singers, this is their livelihood. So you can't make it seem like they're endorsing a product. And they also were both advertisements. So it was like, we endorse Buick. And it's like, but what if she didn't really endorse Buick? So now what happens? Here, is it an endorsement of ChatGPT to be the interface with it? It creates different issues. And she's an actress who doesn't appear, as you said. Now, that said, Stephanie's point is true. In this movie, she's mostly a voiceover actress. Does that make a difference? And maybe what? But that was all. I looked at that and I was like, I think this is kind of distinguishable. The most interesting case that I ran into is Cheers. So because I also thought one of the thought experiments I did was, what if they made a sequel to her and she didn't want to be in it? If the producers mimicked her voice to do a sequel, literally nobody would think this was a problem, right? We'd all go like, yeah, that's what they do because they're making a sequel and it's that character and yada yada. But interestingly, so therefore I thought that meant that maybe if anyone has the rights to it, it's the studio that made the movie, not her, because it's not her endorsing like Bette Midler or Tom Waits. It's this character which is owned by a studio, is what I thought. Then I found this weird case that probably is an outlier, but about Cheers. So Cliff and Norm sued this company. So years after the fact, a company bought a bunch of space in airports and put in Cheers bars in airports. And part of that is they got the rights from Paramount to do that. The studio said, yeah, go ahead, build these Cheers things, whatever, we'll get licensing money. And they, dolled them up with like animatronic Cliff and Norms at the corner. And George went to John Ratzenberger, sued, and said, the studio doesn't own us playing those characters, which seems insane because that seems like the ultimate work for hire. But the court did determine that they deserved money for them being turned into animatronics in a Cheers themed bar playing Cheers characters that were licensed by the studio who owned Cheers. And that was the part where I was like, wow, that gives some room for this.
But see, I do see that as distinguishable because I'm assuming the studio owns the characters of Cliff and Norm. They don't own John Ratzenberger and George Wendt, which is what that looked like. Whereas this studio probably owns Samantha, the AI OS that is in the movie Her, so they could revoice it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but that's what makes this so fascinating, right? Like I'm just like, there's these cases that seem a little weird, but they're like kind of close, and then they're all kind of close in different distinguishable ways, but different distinguishable ways that all kind of come together. Like maybe Niki's take is right, and I was like, but I was like, but do we want a world where that take
Listen
is
to you,
right?
like, could it be? Could she be right?
Well, no, it's
Well,
not
also,
that.
as Niki said, maybe there's going to be new law.
Well,
and
right,
I also
and
want
that's
to
what I
talk,
think
Joe,
needs.
about my other issue. I want to make sure we get
Yeah.
to that, if that's
Go
okay,
for it.
because I
Yeah,
feel pretty
sure.
strongly about it. All right, so I posted it before in the chat. I'll post it again. My link to my article. This initially came out. I posted on an internal company Slack initially. The minute I saw the videos from OpenAI, I was immediately offended beyond belief. Because and then I posted on our Slack with a journalist, and Stephanie identified right away. I said, this sounds like some sex bot from like a movie. And then she immediately identified that it was Scarlett Johansson from Her. And as soon as she said that, everything clicked for me. But everything about their approach, about the voice itself, about the fact that this made it through all the different stages of this company, because Altman was pushing this through because it was his sweaty teenage dream. Like this whole thing was so offensive that these voices were submissive. First of all, they have equal numbers of male and female voices, but 93% of the ones posted and when they launched this were women's voices, most of which were the Scarlett Johansen Sexbot voice. And the Sexbot voice was submissive. It was interrupted and it didn't care. And that was supposed to be a highlight, like a selling point. It had sibilant S's. It giggled. It made flirtatious little comments. And what drove me crazy when I would read the reactions to this is all the men are like, it's so friendly. Like, that is not friendly. Friendly is like someone who's kind and helpful, not someone who is acting like it's closing time at a bar and they want to take you home. That's not friendly. Like everything about this was so offensive that it made it through every single level of initial programming, of quality assurance, of all the women in that company who had to have had that same ick feeling that every woman I've talked to had. I don't know if they didn't have the voice, or they were afraid to say something, or they were ignored, but it made it through all those levels. And then it made it through marketing and PR, and everyone's like, this is a great idea. Let's put these stupid voices out there. And all the men are like, this is fantastic technology, completely over. And they're like, and it's such a friendly, helpful voice. And the women are all like, this is disgusting. If this is what men think a helpful woman sounds like, then we've got a problem here. Like, this is not a friendly, helpful woman. This is a woman who wants to take you home, fluff up your ego, and maybe fluff up some other things while they're there. Like, this is ridiculous. There's nothing okay about any of this. And it really, as a professional woman who spent her whole life getting rid of all those dumb traits I learned when I was 11 to like make the boys like me, it's really offensive.
Oh my gosh, cool.
By the
Hoodie
way,
Pro, are you preparing for something?
Which I want to go back to just real quick. That is that torment Nexus thing. Because that's the point of that Her movie, is that the AI interface shouldn't be this like giggly whatever, because it causes all this other problems. But yes, nonetheless, he thinks that's the right answer. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with the whole concept that the female voice submissive character as the interface for all of these AI things is a deep, deep problem.
Well, and I
But
think you
whether or
pointed
not
out,
Scarlett has a case is a different one. But yeah.
and you pointed out, I think, Niki, in one of your things, like the whole point of it being like because I pointed out, I'm like, they keep cutting it off. And you were like, that's an intentional thing. And then all of the reaction when they took the Sky, they called it Sky, they took the Sky voice down because they couldn't call it Samantha, they took the Sky voice down. All the women were like, thank God. And all the guys were like, but that was the best voice. Like,
Niki, I agree with everything that you said. And I'll tell you, when I first saw it, I watched it, and my reaction was, this is just silly. This is a silly tool. Is this like something we're supposed to use in our workplace to do serious stuff, or is this just some bullshit, frat bros trying to be cute with a tool? I thought it was, not only was it offensive, but I thought it was just stupid. I mean, I have not even tried it. I just think, well, what's it going to do for me if it's going to have a giggly little idiot on the other end? That's not helpful.
Well, the other point to raise is that the other point, I mean, I agree with everything too, but as you say, how it made it through all these layers of supposedly a responsible corporation. This is the corporation that is supposed to be driving the future of responsible use of generative AI, in the world, and they can't even responsibly produce. I mean, they're clueless. It was just so tone deaf and so clueless that you just have to wonder, what does that say about everything else having to do with that company?
But again, if we go on Her being Sam Altman's favorite movie, I don't know if anyone has watched it or watched it recently, and I don't know if I can spoil a movie from 2013, but he thinks that it got AI and human interaction correctly. If you remember the ending of the movie, all the OSs that people start befriending and dating and all of it, they get extra smart, they get the humans addicted to it, and they abandon humanity and leave humanity depressed. And that is what he thinks is the best depiction of how AI and humanity should interact.
I feel like he didn't make it through the movie because he got distracted and he never saw the end. That's what I'm thinking.
We'll leave got distracted there and defining.
So the one devil's advocate thing, because I do agree with all this, but the devil's advocate thing is, and it's going to be a thing that as a society we have to look at very internally. We're going to want our voice assistants to not be, well, we don't necessarily want Gilbert Gottfried in a box. So we're going to want a voice that sounds good. You don't want Joe Patrice in a box. You're going to want something that sounds good. And so if that's the world, what does that mean? And so far, putting aside this OpenAI thing, let's just go with Siri and the Amazon one and all this. They've used these generic, calm women's voices, which I think is porting in a lot of sexist interpretations. And the other thing, that to the extent they ever use a man's voice, they poured in a butler, some straight up an English butler. And that's going to be a thing that we have to have a serious look at, is what is the difference between we want a voice that we don't feel is grating, and what is us trying to get something that we think is submissive and then porting in a bunch of stereotypes.
But Joe, this is the problem, right? First of all, it's twofold. There's this assumption that people prefer women's voices, and there have been studies that show that that's not actually true. Some men may prefer women's voices. A lot of women prefer men's voices. It just varies. People are all over the place on this, but companies produce women's voices. The other issue is when you listen to the men's voices, even in those recordings, there's a couple things happening. First of all, the men are friendly. The men, even in those recordings, are not flirting and acting like they want to take the women's clothes off the minute they have an opportunity to do that. The male voices. And the other issue that happens, that I'm thinking is happening on the back end of those, quite frankly, is that it recognizes if it's a man or woman's voice that it's interacting with. And I think that that bot responds differently. So if it's a women's voice bot, it responds differently to women's voices input than men's. And I think that on the other side of the things, I think the women's in particular respond differently. But I also think that the men's voices probably respond a little more differently. And I wouldn't be surprised that they had a different tone with the men than the women if you're actually using a male voice. But I'm convinced if you listen to just the male voice videos, even when they had it dialed up the way that they did, which no one has access to anymore because they pulled that back after that initial demo, but they are friendly and chirpy and kind of like Scooby-Dooey is what they remind me of. They don't sound like it's closing time in a bar or like they're a young teenage, like a little tween getting coached by a senior in high school to like a math tutor that they have an inappropriate crush on. That's not what they sound like. They sound just like they're genuinely friendly and helpful. And sometimes there are still some ums, but it's a different tone. And I think there's intentional programming on the back end because of Altman. And like I said, this weird obsession he's got with that voice.
Well, it's really twofold. It's the voice, whether it's male or female, but more importantly was just the attitude, as you've identified, Niki. That was what was so stupid. I thought it was just silly. I mean, why do I want to ask a legal question to a middle school person that wants to giggle at stuff? It's just like, well, it's no use. But I will have to say, this
That's
discussion
what associates are for.
This discussion has made me think what I would really like would maybe like a Morgan Freeman voice to help me answer some questions, and that I would probably take very seriously.
Well, because honestly, Steve, you're not the target market for this. They want the people that the people that want the robot to flirt with them, that don't care if they interrupt it.
Right.
Well, and this is not a legal interface. This is meant to be a general use interface. So this is the turn on my lights for me kind of question, and that's
for the entire population, not just for the 49% of men, a good portion of which are not interested. Not a good portion, but probably 10%. I feel like 40% of men are like, this is great. I'm not feeling great about myself. This bot's going to pump me up, but I could be not giving y'all enough credit.
I mean, I think ultimately it's not the gender, right? It is as Steve was just saying, and Niki, as you've said, it's the demeanor, the tone of the voice, and the fact that they give the female gendered voices a different tone and attitude than the male gendered voices. If I want to select a male or a female voice, that should be my prerogative. But I don't want, as you say, I don't want it to be goofy and submissive. I want it to be either neutral or maybe authoritative even. I like my map app to tell me, yes, turn here. I like that. I need it to tell me what to do.
Oh my God. So Bob is a BDSM navigator, apparently.
To be clear, it was flirty and suggestive.
Should have turned left.
It wasn't goofy and silly. It was flirty and suggestive. My Gen Z kids were appalled, including one of my daughter's boyfriends. He's the one that used the word suggestive. Like it is not, it's not just goofy or silly. And I don't mean to like parse your words here, but it's flirty, it's suggestive, and it's wholly inappropriate. If they want to create a sex bot, they're doing a great job, which is fine, but that's not what they're marketing this as.
Yeah.
Well, back to the original discussion that we had, the voice in her was exactly like that. It was flirty and suggestive. That was the whole point.
The whole point of the movie. Yeah.
So clearly, that's what.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave this for further discussion another time. And Steve, I'm sorry, we're not going to get to the really good story that you pointed out this week on drone surveillance by police departments, which maybe we can talk about a little next week, because it was a really interesting story.
That feels evergreen.
That feels evergreen. Yeah, like it's not going away before next Friday.
Nope.
There's only going to be more.
Yeah.
And I apologize for being so,
Don't.
Nothing to be apologized. I mean, it's outrageous what they did, and you're right to be outraged about it.
That's literally the lesson of this, is unlearn those like feelings of like, oh, I should probably add, like that's the whole issue. Yeah. It was.
Yeah. No, Sky would apologize. Niki wouldn't.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody, and hope to see you back here next Friday to talk about whatever happened next week in the world of legal tech. See you then.
Great weekend all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.